My name is Jill Aebi-Mytton, the one at the bottom on the screen. And I'm a counselling psychologist, and I'm working at the University of Salford helping Rod and Linda on their MSc course as a research supervisor. But I do a lot of other things as well, however. Do you know what's so wonderful about being here today is that I'm actually seeing real faces. I'm not just seeing a screen or a camera staring at me, it's real people. And I know that there are a lot of you out there online as well. So it's wonderful. But I am afraid to say that you might be a little bit disappointed today because we don't have any data. So I'm really sorry about that. If you want to leave now, you're very, very welcome to do so. But we are going to talk about the research and how it's going to go and how you can help. And if you come back next year in Barcelona, we promise we'll have some exciting data to show you then. You know what they say, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and I'm afraid that's what's happened. So what we are going to do today is on this slide. It's going to be quite a whistle-stop tour through because there's quite a lot to talk about. And we're presenting some information on past research, but also looking at this study that we have planned. Rod and Linda have written a chapter in this book, but you're not going to be able to buy it because it's extremely expensive. The whole series of the encyclopedia is very expensive. But it's an excellent chapter because it does give you an overview of the research over the last 3 decades, among other things, of course. And it speaks to the range and diversity of abuse suffered by cult members. And it describes, I see it, it's a bit confusing that. It describes the forms of reported and measured psychological distress. And what the things that they highlight in that chapter is the focus on research. Their focus on research is partly to explain why some members of high demand groups appear to be harmed by the group, but not all. And questions came into my mind such as, are the problems reported by the leavers of one group the same or different to another group? And that's something that we're hoping to explore a bit in our study. So, as I've often said, it's not about proving that one cultic group is more harmful than another, because we could never do that. And we also can't say that a cultic group harms all of its members all of the time. Some people are harmed and some people are not. So it'd be interesting to find out why that is. As I've often heard say, life is not a competition. And comparisons between groups, it's not a competition. We're looking for differences, though, and I'm sure we will find them. This chapter actually demonstrates an exponential increase in research since Aronoff's review in 2000, which was really a good review. And a lot of this is due to Carmen Almendros as well and her colleagues in Spain. So it's well worth looking up her research. Some things that the research has shown include a strong treatment effects between pre and post. I'm talking about those in a moment. And the significant relationships found between all the various scales and of things like GPA, but also between that and the psychological harm measures. And we're going to look at that as well. And Dubrow-Marshall and Martin in 2003 felt that the treatment effect of, we're going to talk about Wellspring now, is actually mediated by the group psychological abuse scale. Just quickly about Wellspring, I'm sure some of you have heard about this. Unfortunately, it is not running anymore, but Paul Martin set this up in the 1980s for former members of cultic groups. And what the clients received was specialized treatment program made up of psychoeducation, wrong one, psychoeducation, but also a tailored treatment related to that specific group that they've come from. Now, research was also carried out at the same time, which is the good news. And these are some of the measures that they included, and we are going to be using some of these or similar ones ourselves. and including, of course, the two non-clinical scales there, which I'm also going to tell you a bit more about in a moment. The findings actually demonstrated strong treatment effects. That was one thing that was good, but more relevance to our proposed study is that they also demonstrated some very strong relationships between the scales. So, for example, here's the relationship between the extent of group identity scale and Beck's depression inventory. So the more you identify with a group, the more depression you are likely to feel. Don't forget, though, correlation does not mean causation. And we need to always remember that, but correlations are interesting. Similarly, between the extent of group identity scale and dissociation. Strong, significant relationships throughout. Again, this time with the SCL90R, which is Symptom Checklist 90 revised. I'll tell you about that in a moment. To provide a bit more context to our study, I'm going to briefly look at this study that I took part in, well, I'd actually set up in 2010 to 2012, but it was focused entirely on the exclusive brethren. And in those days, I was known as Jill Mytton. I don't know quite what's happened to my name, really. This research was unfortunately rudely interrupted in 2012 by legal activity, but nevertheless, the findings formed part of a witness statement that I submitted to the Charity Commission, who were investigating this group. Participants were all former members of the Brethren. I had 264 of them, and these are, oops, keep pressing the wrong button. These are the scales that I used. So there are measures of psychological well-being or distress and two non-clinical scales there. Now, before I show you some of the findings, I don't have time to do very much really. I just want to tell you a little bit about the measures of psychological distress so that you can make sense of the graph that I'm going to show you in a moment, okay? So the Symptom Checklist 90 is a very well-used, highly rated, well-validated survey that measures psychological distress. And it provides an overall index of distress called the Global Severity Index, so it's a total score, but it also has 9 subscales, and they're shown here, they're listed here. Okay, if I had time, I would tell you more about each one, but I don't. And the inventory of interpersonal problems is another one I used, which measures the, it identifies the interpersonal sources of distress that are often the focus of psychotherapy. This one has 4 bipolar factors, which are quite interesting. So there's problems with assertiveness, with socializing, with independence, and with nurturance. And so there are 2 polars on each one, if you see what I mean. So hard to be aggressive, hard to be assertive. They're supposed to be opposing. But if we look at the graphs that I obtained from my data, incidentally, I've got HEB there, which stands for Hales Exclusive Brethren. Bruce Hales was the leader, he still is. And I wanted to differentiate this group of exclusive brethren from other groups of exclusive brethren. It's clearer these days which one we're talking about. The red bars are the former members' scores, the blue are the normal population. This is quite a common way of dealing with findings. And you can see quite clearly that right across all these scales and the GSI, the total score, that the former members scored significantly higher, which is quite an interesting finding, I hope. I also explored some factors that seem to be implicated, such as the quality of the relationship that people had with their family who they'd left behind and were now shunned by. And it was the quality of that relationship that was significant, not the frequency of it. I also was looking at social support and found that regular attendance at church was a factor that was important. It did ameliorate the stress. However, going to church or believing in God or having a faith didn't. So there's something about going to church and being part of a community that was supportive. And we're going to be looking a bit more at those sorts of things in this next study. The interpersonal problem scale was the same. There were highly significant scores right across all the factors, which is interesting because it means we find it hard to be assertive, but we're also a bit aggressive. What's that all about, you know? So that's going to be quite an interesting exploration to make, where we find it hard to be supportive, yet we're too caring, right? So it's this bipolar thing that is fascinating to me. Looking again at correlations, this is the GPA this time with the inventory of interpersonal problems, and you can see again a significant positive relationship there. And again, with this time with the dissociation scale, the WDS is the Wessex dissociation scale. Again, a nice positive relationship there. So the more you felt abused by your group, this is the group psychological abuse scale, the more likely you were to experience dissociation. And again, the GPA, with this time with the trauma scale. I'm going to tell you a little bit about these scales in a moment. But again, a very significant relationship. I also found correlations similar to the ones from Wellspring with the extent of group identity scale. I just don't have the graphs for those. Now we come to the really exciting bit, which is the new study, which we've been trying to get off the ground for some while. And we're almost there, which is really exciting. The ethical application is in, and we're in our final stages, which is great. It builds on previous research, both the Wellspring research, my research, and any other kind of research that's out there. What we wanted to do initially, actually, was replicate the study that I was carrying out back in 2010 that was so rudely interrupted. And we wanted to replicate that. But then we thought we could broaden it out. Look at other groups, compare other groups. And these were our objectives. So I'm not going to read them all out because it's too time consuming. But we want to build on the previous research, that's this one, and generate a contemporary understanding of the health and well-being of former members. But what is influencing these scores? I've already mentioned church attendance and the loss of family and so on. But what else does? Is it gender? Does it matter how old we were when we left? Does it matter how we left? What about the losses that we experienced? Is that relevant? And then we do want to look at, my head's in the way, I can see, to see if there's any difference between born and raised, and that's second and multi-generational, and those who joined us, adults, the first generation. Some of you know that in my doctoral research, I created this third category, third category of leavers, the multi-generation leavers, to the existing first and second. I was puzzled by some of the interviews that I'd done. And I looked out across the mountains because I happened to be in Switzerland when I was writing it up. And there were all these mountains in front of me, every single one different. Well, what was it that united them? And I could see the Earth's crust almost at the base of each mountain. And I thought, first generation don't have that crust, or their crust is made up of all sorts of different things. Second generation have a single crust, their parents. But multi-generation, that layers and layers and layers of history below them. And that, I decided, was what was making the difference between some of my interviewees and the others. Continuing with the objectives, obviously we want to improve knowledge of how coercive control works. We know that different groups have different belief systems. But does coercive control work differently or the same in different groups? We don't really know that. We want to add to this gradually developing body of literature, and I hope some of you will join us and do some research too. And we want to continue to validate the group identity scale, the extent of group identity scale, the group psychological abuse scale. And we've got two new measurements down here, which I will tell you about. Now, before I go on to talk about the hypotheses, I'm just going to say something about the design. We obviously chose quantitative this time. We've got two groups, though. Now, here you ask, why have you got two groups? Well, we started designing this just after COVID began. And I thought, hang on a minute, general population, Cultic group, former Cultic group members. General population anxiety levels did this, right? And so did, of course, the former members. So I was concerned about measuring these scores against the normal population means, which would therefore be exaggerated. The difference would be exaggerated. So that's why we designed two groups. And the second group was to be current and former members of any other kind of group, right? And of course, COVID's kind of passed almost. So maybe we don't need to do that anymore, but we are, because that gives us a different kind of comparison. We can look at the difference between people who are in other kinds of groups like choirs or sports groups and see if there's any differences between them and the general population and between them and former members of cultic groups. So, hypotheses, quickly. We are predicting higher levels of psychological distress amongst former members of cults compared to other groups and organizations, but of course also to the general population norms. And specifically, we're going to be looking at anxiety, dissociation, trauma, interpersonal problems, right? We're going to be exploring, conversely, in a sense, the level of well-being. We're expecting it to be lower in former cultic group members, where we don't really know. Now, this one, the child sexual victimization, actually, I'll come to that in a moment, why that's included. But it is predicted to be higher, but we don't really know that one, whether it is higher among former cultic group members or not. That's going to be an exciting exploration. And of course, we're looking for more significant relationships between various scales there. And that follows on very much from previous research, both at Wellspring and my research and Almendros's research in Spain. Oh, yeah. Got a bit lost now. Oh, yes. We're looking for predictions in this hypothesis. So we're predicting that these levels of these scales will be predictors of psychological distress. And the next one, I hope I can make sense of this next one. It's kind of speculative because we have no idea. Anyone that knows about covariant analysis will see what we're trying to do here. We're going to take out of the statistics the differences that are related to the things that you find in cultic groups. If you take that out, we're kind of thinking, well, if both groups are then the same, that means we know that the distress is due to these factors. If the difference doesn't disappear, then something else is going on with we don't know about yet, and we need to find out what it is. So I hope that helps. My head's hurting a bit. I don't know about yours, but it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Sorry about that. But at least you can watch it again because it'll be on the Hoover platform if you really want to. Back to the questionnaires. Obviously, there's going to be a demographic questionnaire, gathering information about people. And but we've got this quite extensive package of questionnaires. It's going to take quite a long time for you all to complete them, because of course you all will complete them, won't you? Yeah, thought you would. So we've got the measures of distress here and the non-clinical scales here. Some of them we've met already, that's that one and that one. So I'm just going to quickly, as best I can in the time I've got, go through the other ones. So the Wessex dissociation scale I've used before. It measures the levels and type of dissociation, and the 3 subscales are designed to be consistent with the 3 stages of information processing. I'd love to tell you about what all that is, because that's really fascinating to me. The Davidson Trauma Scale is designed as a self-rating scale to assess the severity and frequency of traumatic, well, basically PTSD, but the symptomatology linked to it. And it's based on the 17 items found in DSM-4. This is a new one. Trauma coerced attachment screen. And as it says here, it's intended to screen for aspects of trauma coerced attachment, commonly known quite frequently now as trauma bonds. And this is how it has been defined: a powerful emotional dependency on the abusive partner and a shift in world and self-view, which can result in feelings of gratitude or loyalty towards the abuser and denial or minimization of coercion and abuse. Those of you who've left cultic groups may remember when you left, you still revered your leader, some little part of you. I mean, I heard it recently from my nephew's wife. She said, "Oh, I love Bruce Hales. He's lovely. He's been so lovely to me." And yet she'd left. So, and this is what a trauma bond is. So they have a grandiose ideation about the group or the abuser and positive feelings towards them. So that scale, and there are a few examples here of the items so that you can see what sort of questions they ask. In the earlier study that I carried out that was interrupted, I kind of inadvertently discovered through the Davidson Trauma Scale that about 27% of my sample had experienced child sexual abuse. I wasn't looking for it, but it was one of the traumas listed. Now, I had no understanding about how this happened. I had no knowledge of who the perpetrators were. I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know if it had been reported to the authorities. I knew nothing about it. So this questionnaire is devised to have a look at these. And the items, this is just some of the things that the questionnaire asks about. That's going to be a difficult questionnaire for people to fill out, but all questionnaires can be skipped over if so desired. But yeah, I mean, that I think is going to be a very important questionnaire, especially at the moment for former members of the Brethren, because we do have court cases possibly coming up. The extent of group identity scale, some of you may have already come across this one. It's a non-clinical instrument, as it says here, designed to measure a participant's level of identification and adherent to group. I'm thinking this one might show some differences between first, second, and multi-generational people. Because I don't know about other groups, but in the Brethren are your family, and they're more important than your biological family. And there are 9 items that measure these 3 aspects. And any of you that haven't read Rod's totalistic identity theory could do well to have a look at it. He's here, actually. That's why I looked down at the laptop. He's here. He's listening. He's going to answer your questions in a minute if we've got time and if you've got any. And some of you will also be familiar with this scale, I think, because it's been around quite a long time. And so I won't go into the description of it there because I'm sure you've met it. And if you haven't, you can review it on Hoover later. What I want to look at quickly is this other one that was devised. And it was designed to measure aspects of coercive control. And it was actually based on this act that came out in 2015. And that act described, these are quotes from the act. Controlling behavior is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, etc. So that both controlling behavior and coercive behavior are clearly defined. And what we've done is take that description and develop this coercive control scale. So we'll see how that one goes. We're very much developing these, and we're hoping to validate them through this research as well. This scale, way back in 1990, I carried out some research as part of my MSc. It was 30 years after I left the group. And as I said earlier today, it was when I began to realize how the brethren were not a nice group of people. And the brethren loved telling stories, and they all sent me letters back with their questionnaires, because it was all done by mail in those days, no emails, just mail. And they all sent me letters back, hundreds of them. I had about 300 participants, I think. And what I did was take some of the statements that I found in these letters and created a scale with them. I've no idea what it measures, because we haven't really done any analysis of it yet. Okay, so that's what this one is. So we're going to be looking into that one as well. And finally, the well-being scale, just to give a little bit of balance, and quite a useful scale too. I'm told I've only got 3 minutes, and we haven't got, is that including question time? Oh my God, sorry, Rod. Okay, we're not quite sure when it's going to be launched, but please keep your eyes on social media. Those are the inclusion criteria, okay? Fairly obvious ones, really. And recruitment will be by social media, by snowballing, through the various organizations, and you. We want you all to help us recruit people, because actually I really want to know, please try to recruit people who are not on social media, who haven't got emails, because otherwise that's the forgotten few, isn't it? However many there are. Yeah, otherwise it's a biased thing. Right, we've got about 2 minutes.